Welcome to the Discover Health podcast, where we explore the power of gut health, nutrition, and lifestyle to help you feel your best every day. I'm Dr. Josh Sharp, your guide on this journey to better digestion, more energy, and overall well-being. Each week, we'll dive into expert insights, practical tips, and real-life strategies to help you discover health. Ready to start discovering? Let's hit the trail. Welcome back to another episode of Discover Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joshua Sharp, and joining me again today is Dr. Julie Benvenuto. Dr. Julie is the owner of Amplified Connections Counseling, and she holds a master's degree in professional counseling and a PhD in whole medicine and healing nutrition. She's got a deep commitment to integrative healing, and she specializes in uncovering the root of dysfunction and how problems interconnect physically, mentally, and spiritually. And she draws from her holistic approach and uses an evidence-based counseling practice with whole person insight to give individuals just hope towards lasting wellness and transformation. She's passionate about what she does and empowering others, and she creates a safe and insightful space for healing, self-discovery, and true alignment with God's original purpose for our lives. She's passionate about training other counselors and life coaches, and she's even served as a consultant for a major Christian television network and several Dallas-Fort Worth area pastoral teams. Dr. Julie, thank you so much for joining me again today.
Thanks for having me back.
So last time, if you didn't listen to the previous episode, go back and listen to that one. But I do want to recap and just kind of refresh people's minds about what we spoke about before. So could you please explain again trauma, emotional trauma, how it forms in the brain early in life, and what it does to us physically and what it does to us in our behavior?
Yes. So the body and mind work together really strategically to keep you safe. And so if there's any sort of threat that comes along, it wants to prioritize that safety. And that's where we get that fight or flight response, where the amygdala will pick up data. And it doesn't necessarily sort out the difference between a physical threat, if a car were to veer into you versus an emotional threat, like something that feels like somebody's about to reject you or abandon you. The same fight or flight response triggers on. And the body does not want to be blindsided by that. It doesn't want to be caught off guard in any way. So even though quantitatively, we have less bad things happen to us than good things or even neutral things. The brain will highlight the bad ones. And the brain is kind of like the power steering on your car. If you take your hands off of it, it's going to veer one direction, and that veering is going to be more in this prioritization of the safety. And so you could have 10 people tell you that you're incredible at your job, and you could have one person go, "You suck." And then it's just going to default to, "Oh man, and I must be a failure," and all the things. And so it's going to file those memories differently. It's going to file them with a greater potency about what it means about your identity. So we do have to work a little bit harder at shaking those things off and doing things that we don't just absorb and ingest that quote unquote truth, because it's just trying to keep you safe. But then our reactions start to build, they start to accumulate, and the body will make you react to something that's quote unquote small because it's not reacting to the one thing. The neural pathways in the brain are kind of like freeways, and it just says, what stops do we have on this whole freeway that apply to this thing? So even though somebody like a domestic partner might say something rude to you, it makes you feel small. You might look at them and you might react as if you're talking to your mother right then, because it doesn't care that this is not the same event. It just cares that the feeling is the same, and it's going to throw all those feelings right back at you. And that's why our reactions tend to be so much bigger than the events that we face.
Yeah, I think you described that really well. So, what are some signs, again, just to kind of summarize from last time, what are some signs that a person might be carrying unresolved trauma, even if they don't recognize those signs?
Yeah. So a lot of the easiest ones to tell, because we pay attention to our physical reactions a little bit more than we do our emotional reactions, is if your body is starting to react a little bit differently. Things like heart rate changes, if you're starting to sweat. We go to the masseuse and they go, dang, why do you have so much tension in your shoulders? And then you're like, yeah, I'm stressed. And we like, oh yeah, I'm stressed. That means I'm a high performer. But no, your body's telling you things are accumulating and it wants it to address. So looking at those physical reactions is really helpful. The other thing that can tell you something is up is if you notice that your reactions are disproportionate to the
Yeah.
event. Let's say, for example, you snap at your spouse, even though you might be aware enough to apologize in that moment, the fact that your reaction is so much bigger than what the actual event was tells you there's a traffic jam back there. There's a bunch of
Mhm.
files that have not been sorted. And so we've got to dismantle that dam so that the reactions can start to be appropriate for the event.
Yeah, well said. So, any examples of some chronic illnesses or some chronic health issues that can often have an emotional component or maybe are totally an emotional component?
Yes. Well, I'm sure that there's varying opinions on this. And in the lane that I travel in, because people usually get to me after things have already been really, really severe,
Hmm.
I regularly hear that people have seen 8 or 10 counselors by the time they get to me. So
Wow.
the deficit has been there a long time. I tend to see things like POTS, mast cell activation syndrome, fibromyalgia, thyroid disorders. Parkinson's is not usually a population that'll come to counseling, I think for several reasons, but one of which being that it's usually a geriatric population. And, a lot of people feel like, what can counseling do for me at this point? But because of the drop in dopamine in those bodies, counseling would be appropriate. But those are
Yeah.
just kind of like the big names ones that I tend
Hmm.
to see. But I do know that something's brewing when somebody tells me that they're struggling with irritable bowel, if they've got other things going on like high blood pressure, even some hypotension that isn't necessarily in the POTS category, those are signs that stressors and long-term trauma has not been dealt with.
Yeah. So, okay, one of the things that I've loved learning about you is how you incorporate this like a spiritual aspect to healing and how you incorporate the Lord into what it is that you do. So, how does our spiritual life play a role in healing from trauma?
That answer kind of depends on where the person is at because, as I mentioned, the body prioritizes safety. So
Hmm.
if I have somebody that comes into me and my opinion, which may be wrong, but my opinion is that what they're dealing with is not a trauma problem or a body problem, but they're dealing with a spiritual problem. Unless that person agrees or initiates that what they're dealing with is a spiritual problem, their body is going to receive what I'm initiating as a threat. So, a lot of what I have to do is just listen very well to what they think is the problem. And then we build building blocks to that. The example in our last episode of the young man who wanted to speak to his dead mom. He wanted like a practical solution, what he considered a spiritual solution to that problem. But we needed to take a trauma lane first. And so I had to quote the trauma relief in um, a costume of spiritual intervention in order for it to be palatable for him. And then when we started to activate that, then he was able to step into it being a legitimate spiritual solution, but really it was a source of trauma for him that was causing that malfunction. I would say that my perspective in this is a little bit concentrated because I'm in the Bible Belt too. Most of the people who come to me identify as a Christian person. But as you know, there's layers to that name.
Yeah.
And somebody could say, "Hey, I'm a Christian," and that actually means like I like the guy. Jesus is a cool dude. I think there's lots of lots of ways to get to heaven, just live a good life kind of thing. And then we've got, other extremes to that definition too. And so I have to figure out what somebody means when they say that they want a spiritual solution. The most definitive are if people use words like, I'm under demonic attack, or I feel very oppressed right now, or I feel like the devil's after me. That kind of language has a really spiritual connotation that I think I understand what they're saying. But even then, there's some misguidedness. I've had people come to me
Sure.
wanting Christian counseling, but really, it was a parasite. It was a physical problem that was causing the spiritual malfunction. And I've even had the opposite, people wanting a physical solution. And it turns out this is really a spiritual problem. And that's why I'm just a big fan of listening, tasting the wind of where the person is for that day, because they may be
Yeah.
okay with one intervention on one day and not okay with it on the next, especially if their subconscious is okay with one thing and their conscious mind is not okay with another thing. There's just a lot of listening that has to take place. There's a lot of discernment that has to take place. But overall, I believe that God wants the best for his people. And I know that God is not okay with idolatry, but I also know that if we have to take a path that doesn't have his name written all over it, that is essentially going to get somebody back into an appropriate relationship with him. And if that's a supplement at first, I've just seen him be really patient with people and getting them there that way.
Hey, friend, real quick. If you've been enjoying this episode and you're looking for high quality, professional grade supplements that you can trust, I've got something for you. Check out our curated online store at discoverhealth.gethealthy.store. We've handpicked practitioner grade supplements that can be delivered straight to your door. And to say thank you for listening, you can use the code FIRST10 to get 10% off your order. That's discoverhealth.gethealthy.store. Your health simplified. Oh, I mean, I think God demonstrates his patience every day. And with me,
Yeah,
twice every day, three times every day, maybe more than
yeah,
that, many more times than that.
I
So
hear you.
I'm so thankful for that patience. So I wanted to use some time during this episode for practical application. What are some real tangible things that people can be doing? What can they be looking for? What can they be working for? And seeking help, and you described it so well, is sometimes what people think they need isn't what they need. And so working with an experienced practitioner, somebody that's going to listen, getting that connection can be so valuable. It can really save you a lot of time, effort, energy, working with somebody that's, going to listen and point you down the right road. Um, I think can be so valuable. But what I want to do is give people some ideas of what things they can be working on. So in terms of how we attack these emotional traumas. Okay, I recognize, yeah, I've got some stuff in my life, I've got some baggage. What's a good first step for people that they can maybe empower themselves with that they could work on at home?
Yes. I'd actually say that the first step is going to be disregarded by a lot of people because they actually think it's too small of a step. But if you're listening to this and you think that's you, please keep listening, because I think the first thing that we need to do is remember that emotions were given to us. If you're
Hmm.
feeling anxious, even if you're feeling angry, there's a reason that's happening. We don't want to sin in our anger. We don't want to just, like that illustration from the last episode, we don't want to let the emotions drive the car. But the tendency that we have to suppress them and ignore them is one of the biggest problems that we face. So
Mm.
the first step in addressing some of this disconnection between the mind and body and spirit is remember who gave you these emotions in the first place. So if you're feeling anxious about something, I would ask you to take a position of more questions than answers to say, what is my body trying to communicate to me? Instead of, well, you shouldn't be acting like this because you are supposed to be a Christian and you must be really weak, and all of this accusatory conversation that's probably just a programming from your childhood. Take that questioning position to say, what is my body trying to tell me? And a lot of times, because the brain feels validated and it feels heard, it'll give you a really simple solution. maybe you just need a nap. Like there's there's something in there that could not like it's not who you are. It's not something about your identity. Your body just is really tired. It might be really dehydrated. Maybe you're having a blood sugar drop because of the pizza that, whatever the thing is, just giving trust back to your body to say, okay, this reaction is heightened because my body doesn't trust my decisions on how to take care of myself right now. I need to start listening. That's one of the first steps. I'll call that step 0.5 step because what people think is the first step is what I'll say is the next step after that. And that's really what's known as cognitive behavioral therapy, or what's really better known as thought replacement. And we hear about this in Philippians 4:8, 1 Corinthians, I think it's 3, where we want to fix our mind on things that are true, pure, and holy and noble. We want to take thoughts captive. So your emotions are just a result of the thoughts that you're thinking. So
Hmm.
if you're feeling anxious, let's say somebody texts you a really short, really blunt response, and you start feeling anxious. The anxiousness is not the root of that path, and it's not the event that started it. It's actually a space in between. The event triggered a thought, and then the thought triggered the feeling. So if we back that train up and then say, okay, well, what am I thinking about? Oh, well, I'm anxious because I started rehearsing a conversation without that person here about
Hmm.
what I mean to them or what I don't mean to them, or what their opinion is of who I am. They think that I'm an imbecile. We start just blowing this thing up. So when we slow down and say, okay, I'm having that feeling for a reason. What's the thought that I was thinking? And then we actually stop it. And I don't mean suppress it.
Right.
That will backfire. But if we recognize that thought to say, okay, I'm really concerned that this person is going to reject me. I'm concerned that they have a bad taste in their mouth about who I am now. What can I do to either remediate that situation for them or remediate that situation within myself? That is not the same thing as just thinking positive. Positive thoughts are kind of like organ transplants. If we put the wrong kidney inside of you, we're going to create a whole lot of new problems. So you could positive your way out of that, and your body is actually going to be like, you're not doing this to me. I don't like that. I'm not going to think positive about that because it's interpreting it as avoidance.
Mm.
So the positive thought has to be one that's compatible with you. But what's a little bit easier in that thought stopping and taking those thoughts captive is to find a neutral thought. Something like, I don't know what they're thinking. Could be positive, could be negative. I don't know. But I can't do this to myself where I start
Yeah.
running this rumor mill inside my head and creating rehearsed traumas that my body thinks are actually happening. And it's just a story that I'm telling myself. I don't know what they're thinking.
Yeah.
So, do I have the capacity to address that with them right now or not? If I don't, then let me just stop that thought. I'm gonna go do a nice Sudoku puzzle or do something to get my mind off of the rumination and the pattern and the absorption of that belief system, and I'll address it when I can. So that's really what cognitive behavioral therapy is. Usually you'll see a counselor to do that, but there's so many great books and workbooks. My favorite one is called Thoughts and Feelings. There's a bunch of doctors behind that book. One of them is Paul Fanning. I think it's a $20 book on Amazon. And if you just pay attention to what you're thinking about and don't just assume that you have to ingest and ruminate over every thought you think, that can change some things.
Yeah. I like that you pointed out how suppressing it is only going to backfire. It doesn't
Yeah.
work. And just like everything else in the world, there's an episode of Seinfeld about that. Lloyd Braun wisely pointed out, serenity now, insanity later. It doesn't work to suppress it.
I love that.
So so I totally agree. So just because we're saying that, oh yeah, suppressing it doesn't work. I mean, there's people out there, and I think I'm one of these people also that so often suppresses or just kind of pushes those things down. And over time, I think it can kind of numb you out. So,
Mhm.
how can someone begin to reconnect with their body after trauma, even if it's a little trauma, even if it's a series of little traumas? How can someone begin to reconnect after they've been suppressing and just kind of ignoring those things?
Yeah, good question. I think that one of the most commonly used tools for reconnecting that is journaling. I think that a lot of people don't journal because they're worried that somebody's going to see it. They're worried that it's going to get found. And they're just sometimes even scared of just acknowledging what they're really thinking and feeling, or they're just not really verbose people. So sometimes we overcomplicate journaling, and maybe journaling is, I'm afraid that I'm disappointing people.
Mm,
And just acknowledging that, there's something about handwritten context that gives the brain permission to release something and not keep playing the record over and over and over again. When you handwrite it down, it goes, okay, you're addressing it. I will wait. I will move on. And it moves on to the next thing. So journaling, we hear a lot of talk about meditation and mindfulness, those deep breathing exercises, those ways to just remind your nervous system, I am safe right now.
yeah.
Even though this feels overwhelming, even though I don't have a solution to this right now, I can quote unquote obsess right now about my breathing, which is an emotionally neutral subject. I can give my brain another puzzle to solve than this one that feels defeating right now, and I can just switch lanes and I can give my body something that it needs right now in this, nutrient rich air that I'm going to be receiving. And I can reset something right now. This is something that's in my
Mm,
control right now. So whether you're a meditation person, some people are music people, where all it takes is some binaural music or some instrumental music to just help bring them out of that state. So you can kind of taste test and do that Julia Roberts taste the eggs to figure out which one you like. The point is that you're doing something instead of just being passive about your body's needs.
absolutely. So I'm bringing up, the numbing aspect, and you're bringing up, how you can kind of reconnect. But I think some people, as you pointed out in the previous episode, they almost beat themselves up because they have emotions or because they maybe didn't react in a way that they think aligns with who they want to be or the expectation. They're beating themselves up. So, what role does forgiveness of ourselves, what role does
Mm.
forgiveness of others actually play in healing from trauma?
It plays a really big role, and I think you worded this a certain way, but basically saying we view ourselves with a different lens that we view other people. There's certain
Hmm.
lanes where we judge ourselves based off of our intentions, and then we judge other people based off of their actions.
Right.
When trauma is at play, the reverse can be the more predominant result of that, where the reality is I would never talk to somebody that I love the way that I talk to myself. And so just
Mm,
reframing the fact that your standards for yourself are not realistic, and you
yeah.
think that shaming yourself into this conversation is going to create new behavior when in fact you're just going to create a higher need for stimuli or dopamine or some sort of other immediate relief somewhere else. So just even acknowledging what if our expectations of ourselves are real. And I like saying, okay, is what you're saying to yourself right now something that you would say to somebody that you care about? And usually the answer is no.
Mm,
So taking that into account, now I would not have a job if everybody could just do what I'm asking people to do right now in this recording. So there's definitely aspects where this doesn't work. And that does not mean that you're beyond help. It just means that you need somebody who knows more about what's happening and to be able to walk you through what's happening. There's a lot of really great tools, especially recently. I'm a predominantly an EMDR therapist because this cognitive reframing is work. You have to do it a lot to get the habit to change, and sometimes people just need something to be easy. So they'll sit in an office with me and they will just do what we call bilateral stimulation, where we actually overwhelm the brain intentionally so that it gives up. It's like, fine, you win. We arm wrestle the belief systems out of these people. And then I call it kind of the liposuction of mental health. What I was asking people to do with thought replacement is more like the diet and exercise. If your emotional health weight is 600 pounds, diet and exercise is going to be overwhelming to you. And that's okay. We need to liposuction some of this stuff off, and then the diet and exercise will work for you once you feel like you're at a state that you can handle it on your own. And really, there's no shame in needing more help or even just not wanting to do the diet and exercise version of it. EMDR is just one tool. Brain spotting is another one where relief can come immediately. There's a lot of neurofeedback technicians that are able to lower the inflammatory responses on the brain. So
Mhm.
if even if you can, but you just don't want to have to do all of this daily consistent pattern, there's help that can happen. And if you're somebody who looks at taking those thoughts captive and it just feels impossible. The noise of anxiety is so loud. Somebody tells you to meditate and you're like, I wish, I can't even slow down enough to focus on
Right.
my breathing. Just have somebody help you through that part of it and we'll shave some of the rough edges off and then you'll be set and ready to get back into this more maintenance and um, sustainable category when the time is right.
Yeah. I think that's a interesting thing that you talked about. You tell someone to meditate or to be, to just have some quiet time, to be mindful. And that seems overwhelming.
It can be.
And I know that you've probably had this experience, and I have too. You ask, and this is the person I'm talking about who has this issue. You ask them a simple question, what did you eat for dinner last night? Whatever it is. And 10 minutes later, we're on some topic. I don't even know how we got there. And we've never even come close to addressing the initial question. Imagine what's going on inside of their mind if that's how they're
Hmm.
communicating on the outside.
Yeah.
And so um,
Yeah.
that can be such a difficult thing to ask someone to do, depending on the person and their situation. So, what are some scriptures that you found that can bring comfort or clarity to someone who's trying to heal from this trauma or someone that's trying to work through forgiveness?
Yeah. So the Bible is full of really great scriptures, but I just like remembering in general that Jesus was absolutely perfect and he still made enemies. People did not like him.
Mm,
And I like thinking about that aspect because when we've been in trauma, when we've been rejected by people and we've been hurt by people, the assumption is, well, if there must just be something wrong with me. If I do everything right, then I'm not going to keep running into this.
yeah.
And unfortunately, the healthier we become, we actually make some more enemies because the people who benefit from our lack of boundaries start giving us more consequences when their benefits stop.
Yeah.
So I just like remembering the fact that we were not promised a life without adversity. And when you're in the middle of that, and I'm thinking of a time in my life right now when if somebody said that to me, I really would have wanted to slap them, like you don't want to have to hear that stuff because life just sucks sometimes. But
Yeah.
when you're through it and then you understand the purpose behind that pain, you understand the Romans 8:28 that God did bring everything together for good for those that love him, that he never lets us go through something that's pointless. When you think of the fact that there's got to be a point to this, even if it's to change me. My pastor used to give this analogy of this guy that God told to go out and move this huge boulder, and he would just go out and he would press on this rock, and he's like, yeah, the Lord's using me, I'm gonna go press on, I'm just a pressing, I'm pressing and press every day, just go press out on this rock. And finally he's like, this thing is not moving, what are you doing? Why'd you ask me to go out here? And God's like, look at your body. Look at how you have changed. The point was not to
Mm,
move the rock, the point was to move you. And that's really what our adversity is about. And when we just remember that God has a plan, when we remember that the Bible is full of people who screwed up and their screw ups somehow qualified them to do something great. When they failed, when Jesus was hated, when we reanalyze what truth really is, when we
mm,
don't use a rom-com to decide whether we're lovable or not, when we go back to that space and just reset our expectations, that's one of the biggest ways that I think the Bible helps us be content and even abundant in this life when we're not looking at the standards of the world as a measurement of success.
yeah. I think that's great. I love that analogy of, the guy trying to push the rock. That's
Right.
such an amazing thing. And in my experience as a practitioner, working with thousands of people, you come across people that have been through some unbelievably difficult things. And a few of those people I've had the opportunity to ask them, recognizing their faith, and they're on the other side of it now. I've had the opportunity to ask them, like if, if you could go back in time and avoid this, would you do it? And it's amazing the people of faith and some of the hard things that they've been through, and they wouldn't change it, and it
Right.
just speaks to, yes, it's hard and yes, it sucks, but God can use it in such an amazing way that not
Mhm.
even you would, not even you would change it. And so that's an amazing thing to think about
Great
sometimes.
example. Yeah,
Um,
because once we see what it produced in us,
yeah.
then we start going, okay, I see there was a point to it. But when you're just
Mhm.
blindly trusting God, like, I don't know about this. Is there a plan B? Is there an injection hatch? And we just, are ready for all of that. But we usually, once we get to the other side of it, we see why that was the path we had to take.
Yeah. So, in terms of taking care of our emotional health, taking care of our mental health, taking care of our spiritual health, what are some practical things that people could be doing daily, that people could be doing weekly, whatever that might look like, to try to help prevent these, you talked about in the last episode, death by a thousand cuts, these emotional traumas, these emotional wounds from getting to this place where it's affecting us in such a significant way?
Yeah, so there's a few different priorities that people could have for that. I'll speak to the one that's one of the most predominant here in DFW because there's actually a lot of money, there's a lot of wealth in DFW. So this is not 100% of the problem, but some of the problem that we face in this area is that people will work themselves to the bone
Hmm.
because there's a keeping up with the Joneses type of
Sure.
standard that has to be in place. And so sometimes what we're doing is we're just redefining what success is. So there's a certain amount of money that you could gain that is not going to be worth your health. It's not going to be worth your peace. And so just being able to pause and remember that God commanded a Sabbath, did not suggest a Sabbath. God commanded a Sabbath and say, you cannot burn the candle at both ends and expect the wax to still be there. So taking time to go for walks here in DFW, you have to do that in the morning or you're going to get burnt to a crisp otherwise. So taking the time to just be outside, getting the sunlight so that you're not vitamin D deficient,
Hmm.
those are all just as spiritual practices as they are physical ones or mental ones. So doing those types of reframings of who are you serving? You cannot serve God and mammon. And are you just assuming that you're the casualty that you're facing in your mind and body is worth it because of some sort of image you're trying to create? Again, I don't say that from judgment. I just say that as somebody who knows that there's a certain amount of money that these problems are not worth it. So those daily habits and just remembering what your priorities are and re-examining your expectations of yourself can be really helpful. In terms of emotional health, going back to the idea of just remembering that we cannot be immune to reacting to things. These reactions are part of the way that we were created. It's just our job to make sure that our reactions don't create new consequences for us and new consequences for other people. So oftentimes I'll tell my clients if we envision life is like a mountain, we feel like we're circling the mountain over and over again, like I keep having the same problem. But my question is your reaction time in between the spirals getting shorter? Because if the length in between them is getting shorter, that means we're actually getting at a higher elevation. And if you're anxious for 15 minutes, that is perfectly normal compared to the fact that you started to work on your emotional health and it would take you 15 days, to get out
Yeah.
of that
Hmm.
cycle. So again, reframing your expectations of what's healthy and what's normal. One of the fun, cute little phrases to solve some of this is, "Are you shooting on yourself?" Are you shooting on other people? Because those shoulds create shame, and shame is demotivating on a cellular level, on a brain chemistry level. So we have to fix our minds on things that are helpful. The other real easy hack is just making sure that you're not too isolated. And I don't mean easy as in like everybody should be able to do it, but in that, it doesn't come in four different bottles, is that isolation piece.
Yeah.
Studies show that isolation is just as inflammatory as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So if even post COVID, if you are still comfortable being by yourself, we've got to change up that game plan. And you being around people, particularly healthy people, particularly life-giving people, having diversity in your life, being with people from all different walks of life, learning from each other, that can be incredibly healing. So we don't all have to sit in a counseling office to be healthy. We can just make small daily decisions that keep us moving in that direction.
Yeah. It's almost like God knew what he was doing when he
Yeah,
commanded us
shocking.
to have a Sabbath rest. It's
Yeah.
almost like God knew what he was doing when he commanded corporate worship.
Yeah.
Some people like to use the scripture, oh, well, where two or three are gathered in my name, then I'll be there also. It's like, well, if you read the chapter, it's talking about discipline. It's talking about, church discipline. It's
Yeah.
talking about within the group, within the body of believers. And so getting together with community is so, so powerful.
Huge.
And healing is a huge, huge component whenever you're trying to heal. Being in community, it makes a difference. It really, really
Mhm.
does. So
Yeah.
doing it alone is not good.
Well, and
How
one
to,
of the things I think people disregard is what they bring to the equation.
yeah,
They might look at the environment that they're, let's say, going to church in, and they might say, like, nah, I don't really get anything out of it. But you never know what, a smile or an
mhm,
encouraging word might do to somebody else. The most impactful things that people have said I have done for them for things that I didn't think were things, that I'm like, well, that's all it took, okay, good.
yeah,
So you just never know. And even energetically, we operate at a higher level. We turn into, that's why, spouses start to look like each other after 50 years. It changes you when you're around people regularly. And most of the people that I work with, when they've just got their little tribe of two or three people, they don't realize until they've actually left that little bubble that what they thought was healthy was not. And
yeah,
that's not always the case, but we attract people who are like us. And when we grow, we start repelling things that are not healthy. And so
mhm,
some of that shaking up needs to happen too.
yeah. And it's okay.
Yeah.
God brings people into your life and out of your life, and
Yep.
that's okay. Yeah. So for the woman who's listening that might feel broken, that might feel overwhelmed, somebody that might be ashamed of her trauma response, what would you want her to know? What would you say to that person?
I'd say that there isn't anything that can't be healed in that regard. I've never met
Mm,
anybody that I said you are too broken for this to happen. Even if we look at, the structure of things with mental health hospitals, there's always an answer. And sometimes that answer is actually a progesterone supplement. Sometimes that answer is trauma therapy. But
yeah,
the point is that there is a solution. But
right.
it's really intimidating to put your trust in a practitioner and then find out that they're butt heads or they don't know what they're doing and somebody gave them a license and shouldn't have. And that's disheartening. But I know that change can happen and you just keep putting one foot in front of the other and anything can happen.
Absolutely. So, where could a listener go to find Christian-based counseling or support if they resonate with what we talked about today? Is there a resource that people could go to look for maybe people that do things in your similar style?
Yeah. So one of the easiest resources to use, and it's not surefire, you still want to kind of interview counselors back or interview practitioners back to make sure that they're a good
Hmm.
fit for you. But I love sending people to psychologytoday.com. And the reason I like that website is because you can sort the counselor based off of zip code. You can sort the counselor based off of gender. You can sort the counselor based off of whether they're faith-based. You can sort the counselor based off their area expertise. So hypothetically, you could just go ahead and get on that site. You could type in 76021, you could type in female, you could type in EMDR therapist, you could type in takes Blue Cross Blue Shield. Boom. And it'll list all the people within that filter with a little bio where you can get a little sample of who they say they are, at least in writing. And then you just pick maybe one or two of those to call and just kind of ask them about how they tackle treatment, how they interact with their clients, if there's any beliefs that you want to know whether they have or don't have. I had one person the other day go, I thought you wouldn't like me because I use homeopathics. I'm like, that's why we need to be friends. Like, come on, let's do this thing. That's like, you're a good fit. Like she just assumed that a counselor wouldn't be okay with something like that. And I'm like, that is a great tool for you to use.
Yeah.
So yeah, you just kind of figure out who your people are in that. And there's counselors that really can only take you so far. So sometimes you have to cut out a certain part of the difficulty with one person, and then you outgrow that person, and then you move on to the next one. So it's okay for that to happen too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then if somebody wanted to connect with you and learn more about what you do, how could they get in touch with you?
The easiest website to get in touch with me is amplifiedwellness.site. For counseling purposes, I'm only legally allowed to counsel people in Texas. At the time of this recording, I have a license pending in Oklahoma. So I wouldn't be able to work with anybody on a counseling front, but I know you and I, Dr. Josh, have a lot in common in the ways that we try to create content for people to be able to heal. I'm working on a educational program that combines everything we're talking about, mind, body, and spirit, into some modules and videos. So there's information that people can reach out to there. And I really, really like, even if I'm not the right fit for somebody, if I know somebody, particularly in the Texas area, that's a really good fit for you, I just love getting you to the right person. So if that's somebody that I know, but in most cases, if it's outside of my sphere of influence, psychologytoday.com would be the best resource for the counseling stuff.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me. I've learned a lot, and I hope the listeners have learned a lot as well. And I really think that you've given us a lot to think about and some really empowering tools to use on our journey to better emotional health, mental health, and physical health.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for tuning in to the Discover Health podcast. Remember, your health is a journey, not a destination. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next week.